Hey everyone, I'm Allison Mars. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
The road ahead is going to be long. There are bumps along the way. This is only the first step in a long road we will have to travel.
Senate Democrats announce a $3.5 trillion budget agreement. President Biden heads to the Capitol to push for it. Will it have enough votes to pass? The Texas-sized showdown on voting rights still going strong. The state Senate passing a restrictive voting bill while dozens of Texas House Democrats are camping out in Washington.
But eventually there will be a compromise, a bill that's agreed to, that both chambers will vote out, and it will go to the governor. The governor will sign an elections bill into law.
Plus, Britney Spears back in court in L.A. asking to choose her own attorney. Will the pop star win any more of her freedom today? We start today in Texas. NBCNews.com senior reporter Jane Tim is with us, along with NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson, who's in Austin. Priscilla, we'll start with you. Texas Senate Republicans passing their restrictive voting bill, the lawmakers focusing in on false voter fraud claims. There's still no quorum in the House, though, with the Dems in D.C., so what happens now?
Yeah, Allison, there's a lot going on here. Actually, in any moment now, House Republicans are going to be kicking off a press conference, and they're not going to be talking about their now stalled voting bill. They're going to be focusing on retired teachers receiving a 13th check. And why is that the case? Because that is one of several other issues that are on Governor Abbott's agenda during this special session. And so one of the things we're seeing on the ground here is a refocusing of the conversation around not those controversial issues like the voting bill, but around more tangible issues like property taxes, checks for retired teachers, foster care reform, things like that. But at the same time, as you mentioned, that the Texas Senate did pass their version of this bill, and they have been out defending that bill. I want you to take a listen to some of what they had to say in a presser.
We urge people to look at the provisions of the bill, not the national talking points out of D.C., but what is in the bill. That's what this is about. How much fraud is okay? None. How much suppression is okay? None. That's why Senate Bill 1 makes it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And we will stay here for as long as it takes and come back as many times as it takes to give these protections to every Texas voter.
But of course, Allison, that bill is now stalled because without both chambers, nothing can become law here in Texas. Allison?
All right, Priscilla Thompson in Texas. Thank you. Let's bring in NBCNews.com senior reporter Jane Tim. Jane, you have a new story out today on the history of walkouts in Texas. This is not the first time we have seen this happen. Your piece is called Police Pursuits and Killer Bees. What happened when Texas Democrats broke quorum in the past? Not to insult your writing at all. It's fabulous, but I feel like that picture says it all. Could you tell us about the killer bees back in 1979?
Right? Like killer bees in politics. This is like definitely what we need more of. So one of the things I was most curious about after we reported that this breaking quorum was going to happen, this incredibly dramatic Monday with the private jets and sort of fears of arrests that went out through that day, is what happened the last time. So we know that there's been a quorum breaks in 2003, but all the way back to 1979, we saw Texas Democrats breaking quorum. Now, the quorum break that most of the lawmakers who broke quorum back in 1979 have passed, but one of them is a current U.S. Rep Lloyd Doggett. He told me all about it. And these lawmakers essentially hid off site. They didn't even leave the state the way these lawmakers, 60 lawmakers, have. About a dozen liberal Democrats in the Senate were angry about a bill that would have changed how primary elections in Texas are run. And they ended up hiding in a two-car garage converted to an apartment for 4 days with a dozen lawmakers trying to stop this bill. It was a very sort of covert operation. They expected to sort of slink off for a few hours and ended up being there for days. There was a statewide manhunt. The Texas Rangers were nicknamed the Bumblebees for being unable to get it. A lawmaker's brother was arrested by Texas Rangers who mistook him for the fugitive senator. One of the most dramatic tales in politics that I think is undertold, and especially those costumes. You got to love them.
Jane, am I crazy or have I just missed it? Why is this not a movie?
I know there's a book written about it, but, Rep. Doggett, one of his staffers told me, he never talks about this, but I wish he would. It's just so exciting. It's truly, politics is not for the faint of heart. And I think it's also what it tells us, I think, about this is that branding and storytelling really do matter when you're going to pull off a stunt like this. Theirs was 4 days and it ended up being successful. But Texas Democrats absolutely have to create a narrative here to convince their voters as to why they're going to leave town,
All right, someone please get Sorkin on the phone and make this happen. This is definitely a movie that I would watch. You mentioned your conversations with the congressman. You share so much of it in your reporting. We know he met with Texas Democrats on the Hill yesterday. What's he saying? How is he comparing their fight to his more than 40 years ago? What else did he tell you?
Yeah, he met them at the hotel once they got there late on Monday night around 11 p.m. But let's listen to a little bit of that conversation.
I think the Killer Bees accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. We're glad the Killer Bee spirit is alive and well in these Texas House Democrats, but we know they have a much bigger challenge than we had. They face a Republican who's running for the United States presidency in Greg Abbott, trying to outcompete Georgia, Florida, and other Republicans to demonstrate he's more like Trump than anyone else. He's accomplished that, but we have to overcome it.
Now, the Killer Bee nickname actually comes from the tactics they used to use, these sort of scrappy delay tactics, which when he told me about how he used to do them, often talking at length about a bill that was expected to pass just to try and delay the schedule, it reminded me of this caucus and these Democrats and how they delayed the bill back in May. So it's clear the Killer Bee spirit, as he says, is alive in this caucus.
Jay, this is the most fascinating political story I've read all day, if not all week. It's terrific. Thank you for sharing it with us. You also have another write-up, another story going on. More than 150 companies writing a letter to Congress urging them to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Obviously, all of this connected here. And there are some big names on that letter. Look at them here. Apple, Amazon, Walmart, Google, Target, Starbucks, Hershey's, and it goes on and on. This isn't the first time corporate America stood up and said something. We know last month more than 70 companies said they supported the For the People Act. That was the Democrats' legislation that got filibustered by the Senate Republicans the day after. Earlier this spring, hundreds of companies spoke up about potential voting restrictions in Georgia and Texas. Are these corporations starting to build some momentum here? Can you see them, say, swaying Senator Sinema and Manchin on the filibuster, or is Congress uninterested in answering to corporate America?
I can't say that PepsiCo and Google are going to convince Senator Manchin on the filibuster here. But I do think what you're seeing is these companies again and again coming out with these letters and pushing. They're basically begging Congress to do something. I mean, I don't know how many different letters we can get written out, but they keep coming out with them. And what we've seen them move towards is more narrow legislation. So while early in this narrative, there was a big push for sort of big, broad, sweeping For the People Act. It's like 800 pages long. Sort of a Democratic wish list at times. And this is saying, you know what, let's just go back to where we were in 2012. Let's go back to the fully enacted Voting Rights Act. Let's just get something on the books. I mean, these corporations, in my view, are simply begging for action. They just keep making this point as clear as possible. The voting rights fight and these back and forth in the states is just not something they think is good for business.
Jane, for anyone who's complaining that it sounds like the same old political stories this summer, whether it's infrastructure, voting rights, your pieces today certainly prove them wrong. Thank you so much. We're really into them.
Thanks, Allison.
President Biden talking with Senate Democrats about spending today. The party leaders hashing out a $3.5 trillion budget proposal. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joining me now. Shannon, the president saying we're going to get this done when he showed up at Capitol Hill today. How did that lunch go, and where is the party on this plan?
Well, we've entered the next phase of these discussions, and that is the arm twisting phase, where you're seeing the president go up to the Hill to start pushing pressure on all of the Democrats in the Senate to get something done. And Press Secretary Jen Psaki indicated today that if they had 50 Democratic votes, there would be a vote on this. So there is a sense that they do not have their party united behind this as well. And that's why we're seeing Biden on the Hill today. Here's what he had to say a little bit after that lunch.
I have no comments, just saying great to be home, great to be back with all my colleagues, and I think we're going to get a lot done.
And Biden was asked about this again just a few minutes ago from reporters in the Oval Office. He again expressed some optimism that he is going to get something done. He is hopeful that, unlike the last administration, they can get this ball across the finish line. But he also emphasized that this is a two-track deal. They've got to get this $3.5 trillion big deal done, but they also still want to get this $500 billion infrastructure plan that was negotiated with Republicans and Democrats through as well.
Shannon, the White House pretty busy today. The administration announcing a new plan to evacuate Afghans who helped U.S. troops. It's called Operation Allies Refuge. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so they've already gotten a number of sort of translators and people who worked on the military bases and helped the U.S. troops in other ways. They've already gotten a lot of them out of the country, but many still remain. And of course, as we have been reporting, the U.S. operations in Afghanistan are essentially over. 90% of the troops are out, so there's not much protection left for these people remaining in the country. That's why we're seeing the administration say today that they're going to begin emergency airlifts of these Afghan refugees out of the country to third-party countries, which they wouldn't identify, saying that until their visas and paperwork can all be processed and they can come to the U.S., they'll have someplace safe outside of Afghanistan to wait.
All right, Shannon, we have to look back to yesterday because it's causing some issues today. You have new reporting on some progressive backlash against President Biden's voting rights speech in Philly yesterday. They are upset he did not talk about ending the filibuster. So hit us with both sides of the issue here.
Right, well, there has been a lot of frustration from progressives really since the first day of this administration that President Biden wasn't pressing harder on the key priorities to them, and voting rights being one of those. But, you know, that's really seeming to start to come to a head for some of these groups, particularly in this speech yesterday, which was intended to show that President Biden was taking this issue seriously, to raise awareness about it and put it on a higher profile. But they complained that there was no mention of the filibuster in there, which essentially means there's no way to get anything passed in Congress. So a number of groups speaking out, civil rights groups included. Press Secretary Jen Psaki was pressed on this earlier regarding the filibuster. Here's what she had to say.
In terms of the filibuster, it is a legislative procedural process that is up to the Senate to determine the path forward on. And I will leave it all to you to determine what the vote count and the whip count is there, but there is not the majority to support that. And I know we focus on one or two, but it's certainly more than that of individuals who oppose changes to the filibuster because of the history.
So despite the concerns, the White House continuing to say that this is not an issue the president is going to be doing arm twisting on. You're going to see him twisting arms up there on infrastructure, but not on significant changes to the filibuster that could get something like voting rights through. At least that's the position right now out of the White House.
All right, Shannon, a busy day for the White House. The president running all over the place today. Thanks for getting us up to speed.
Thank you.
So we have the price tag on the Senate Democrats' budget plan. It's $3.5 trillion. But what exactly is in it? Here to break it down, two of our favorites, NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake. He's in the Russell Rotunda. Garrett, we'll start with you. Majority Leader Schumer saying that this deal includes a robust expansion of Medicare. What else do we need to know about it?
This deal has just about every major Democratic priority that you've heard a candidate run on or talk about on the Hill over the last 2 years. It has that expansion of Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing. It has perhaps $1 trillion for climate-related provisions. It has universal pre-K. It has money to help with community colleges. You name it, this has some version of it in it. It is an enormous Democratic grab bag of priorities, and it is getting very well received least from the parties left so far. Here's what Elizabeth Warren told me about it earlier today.
It's a strong step forward. Now, look, I'm going to be in there fighting to make sure that we've got enough money to attack the climate crisis head on, that we have real support to build universal child care, and to make sure that the billionaires and the giant corporations are the ones who are paying their fair share.
And Allison, the exact amount of money that'll end up in all these different buckets remains to be seen. That's part of what the senator is referring to there. We know the top line cost of this bill, but not how much money exactly each of these priorities will get. So there's still quite a bit of negotiating to be done among Democrats before this is all said and done.
John, Senate Budget Committee Chair Bernie Sanders was pushing for $6 trillion here. He certainly didn't get there, but in your latest story on NBCNews.com, you write Bernie Sanders lost the presidency, but he is shaping the agenda. How is he doing that, and how is he able to get Democrats on the same page here?
Well, to Garrett's point, this bill has everything in it that you've heard Democrats talk about, a whole Christmas bag, if you will, of Democratic priorities, and what particularly progressive priorities. And one of the things that Sanders is doing here in consultation with the Democratic leadership, and from what my sources say, Elizabeth Warren has been a particular proponent of this. In order to get that bag of goodies down the chimney, what they're going to do is make each of them perhaps a little bit smaller, with the idea that once they get these things into law, whether you're talking about expansion of Medicare or you're talking about green energy legislation, that eventually you can expand that. So when we talk about a $3.5 billion bill, that's over 10 years. And typically what Congress will do is enact programs for 10 years and fund them for that whole 10-year window. But they don't have to do that. They can do some of them for fewer years and then add on to it later. And I think that's what you're going to see. So really the whole tenor of this discussion, especially right now that we've seen this top line number and not understand what's going to be in it, has really been in the direction of the progressives and Sanders in the face.
Garrett, our colleague Leanne Caldwell caught up with Senator Joe Manchin. The pay-fors have been a huge issue for him here. What's his take on the budget as is?
Yeah, Manchin's been pretty clear not to really comment one way or the other on what he'd like to see here, but he does have his concerns about making sure that this bill is paid for. And the way he describes those concerns tells us a little bit about what he's thinking. Listen to what he told reporters earlier today.
I've been very clear that I want to see the pay-fors and make sure that whatever we do is going to be globally competitive.
Is $3.5 trillion too high? Is $3.5 trillion too high?
Depends if we can pay for it. It'll still be globally competitive.
So what I hear there is not that Joe Manchin's worried about the overall price tag here, whether it's $3.5 trillion or $3 or lower, but how it's paid for. When he talks about global competitiveness, what he's really talking about is what the corporate tax rate is going to be. And Manchin's been pretty clear about this in the past. He doesn't want to see a big change in the corporate tax rate to make American businesses more highly taxed than their competitors overseas. And that, again, is going to be part of the alchemy of exactly how they make the math work here. To raise those taxes in a way that will bring about as much money as they say they need without crossing whatever Joe Manchin's red line ends up truly being on that issue.
John, let's get back to Bernie Sanders for a minute here. You say that he's dealing with challenges from centrists in both chambers and even from some of his allies. Let's talk about what he's up against here as the Democrats sort of shape all this and bring this Christmas bag, if you will, together.
Well, to borrow Garrett's latest metaphor, as far as red lines go, almost every Democrat in Congress has a can of red paint and the ability to draw those red lines on the ground wherever they want. If you lose one Democratic senator on this, the whole thing goes down. So if it's Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema or any of the others in the Senate that decide that they don't like what the taxes are or what the specifics of the spending are, it goes down. By the same token, in the House, we may get possibly some frustration from moderates who agree with Manchin and Sinema, or you might get frustration from progressives who think it's not good enough. As one source told me yesterday, a moderate Democratic source, everyone is loaded with red lines right now.
All right, guys, we got to go. But before we do, John, I just have to ask, last time we saw you, you had a lot more furniture. We just all want to know, is everything okay? Have you been robbed? Are you all right?
Undisclosed location. Killer Democrat. Just turn the camera away. Last time you had a nice view.
Your safety and your location is of our utmost concern, so we just always need to make sure you're doing all right. Garrett's in the usual place, so we're not as worried about him. Garrett, John Allen, thank you guys so very much.
Thanks, Al.
All right, it's time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we start with some news about Facebook, the company sending a petition to the FTC asking for Chair Lina Khan's recusal in its antitrust case. Now, this could jeopardize the agency's lawsuit against Facebook, since Khan is the tie-breaking vote to decide how and if the case should move forward. The FTC didn't immediately respond to our request for comment. And new rules requiring Chinese tech experts who find weaknesses in computer security to inform the government of their findings. These rules, further tightening the Communist Party's control on information, fully ban private sector researchers from working in China. They go into effect on September 1st. And some harrowing news from Europe. The UN reporting in the first 6 months of 2021, over 1,000 migrants lost their lives journeying to Europe. Now, the route between Libya and Italy proving to be the deadliest, with 741 people killed at sea. The number of asylum seekers and refugees who died more than doubled this year. And what's worse, experts believe the number of deaths are actually higher than what's being reported. And here in the United States, the U.S. government reporting 93,000 overdose deaths last year. This number far eclipsing the 72,000 reported the previous year, with numbers increasing in all but 2 states, and that's according to the CDC. The U.S. was already struggling with an overdose epidemic, and experts say lockdowns and other pandemic restrictions actually worsened the crisis. Well, 2 Amazon employees resigning to protest the continued sale of a book they say frames transgender youth as mentally ill. One of the employees who resigned had worked for Amazon for 7 years. These resignations coming on the heels of a complaint shared on the company's internal message board. And that was a message that drew the support of 467 corporate employees. Allison?
All right, Simone, thank you so much. 4 Iranians charged with a plot to kill a Brooklyn-based author and human rights activist. Prosecutors say the Iranian government directed them to kidnap the journalist and get her back to Iran. Court documents didn't list her name, but Masih Alinejad tweeted that she was the target, thanking the FBI for foiling a plot she says was orchestrated under President Rouhani. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams joining me now from Washington, D.C. So, Pete, what are prosecutors saying happened here?
Well, they're saying that the 4 Iranians who worked for Iran's intelligence service hired private investigators in the United States to keep tabs on her, photographing her house, taking pictures. They even asked if it was possible to park a car outside and give them live pictures 24 hours a day. The FBI became so concerned about this that agents knocked on her door and said, "You need to leave here." And she was in a safe house for 8 months. She told my colleague Jonathan Dienst of WNBC her reaction when she found out about this.
I was shocked when I found out from FBI that the intelligence service actually sent someone in Brooklyn, in my beautiful garden, with my sunflowers and taking pictures of me, my families, and sending to intelligence service. And I was like, why? Why? You know? It's quite scary, but at the same time, I have only one life. I'm not a criminal, you know? I'm just an activist.
The Justice Department says the Iranians told the private investigators that they hired here in the U.S. that their client was somebody that she owed money to in the Middle East. But, of course, that wasn't true.
Pete, Alinejad telling NBC News the Iranian regime's been targeting her for years, saying her family's even been involved. What can you tell us about her history with the regime, and why is she such a focus for them?
Well, she is very outspoken about Iran's human rights record, especially its record toward women. She makes speeches. She has a considerable social media presence. She does Twitter feeds. She does Facebook postings. She's written a book. She does television appearances. So she is one of the more outspoken and media savvy of Iran's critics.
Pete, U.S. prosecutors are saying this isn't an isolated event. What do you know about other kidnapping attempts by the Iranian regime?
Well, the Justice Department says Iran has a history of searching for dissidents around the world and trying to either lure them back to a neutral country where they can be kidnapped and brought back to Iran, or just flat out kidnapping them, taking them back, and putting them in jail, and in some cases even execute them. They tried to do that in this case, the government says. They tried to get her relatives in Iran to tell her that they wanted her to go to another country and offered them money to do it, but the government says that the relatives refused to do that.
All right, Pete Williams in D.C., thank you.
You bet.
A major Russian-speaking ransomware gang gone. REvil, the group behind the JBS and Kaseya attacks, is offline. It is one of the most prolific cybercriminal organizations in the world, hacking more than 360 U.S. targets in 2021 alone. NBC News reporter Kevin Collier joins me now. Kevin, you're reporting REvil's online footprint, their blog, their payment processing infrastructure, all offline. When did all of that disappear, and do we have any idea why?
It all went offline around 1 a.m. yesterday morning, around 8 a.m. Moscow time, all gone. And we don't have any solid idea what's happened, just some educated guesses. Did the top military hackers working for the United States kick them offline as Biden kind of threatened? Did Putin finally get serious about the issue and send law enforcement after them? Or are they just reorganizing, enjoying the riches, biding their time before coming back, as some ransomware hackers are known to do? We don't know.
So, Kevin, as you said, there's a ton of speculation about whether the Biden administration might have gotten involved, if the Kremlin got involved here. What are you hearing from sources both here in the U.S. and in Russia? What are they telling you?
So we can't definitively rule out that the Russian government played a role here in the disappearance, but we can say that Russia is claiming no credit. You can see we've got comments from Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov this morning. He fielded several questions about REvil's disappearance. He said, I do not know which group has disappeared from where, when asked about REvil.
What a great dodge there. I do not know which group has disappeared from where. That is a great, just a fantastic response. How about from the administration or from sources here? Have we gotten any hints, any sense of whether the Biden administration might have taken some action yet?
They are completely mum. Everybody is offering no comment. You would kind of think that they would want to claim a victory after kind of getting hammered by so many ransomware attacks in the past few months, well, 6 months, 8 months, really. But so far, absolutely nothing from the White House, which has lent some credit to the theory that they are simply reorganizing.
REvil is one of the most notorious cybercriminal organizations in the world, but we have had so many hacks, attacks, ransomware issues over the last few months. Could you just remind us about some of their more high-profile recent attacks for our viewers whose brains are just clouded with so many of these?
It is ridiculous trying to keep up with all of them. Yeah, they were behind the hack on JBS, the major meat supplier, maybe 2 months ago, that shut down meat processing for about a day across North America. As well as over the 4th of July weekend, this incredibly pervasive spree that hit this small software company called Kaseya, and through the magic of the internet, ended up trickling into infecting about 1,500 companies around the world. There weren't a ton of high-profile U.S. victims there. There are several schools, several small towns, but it was so severe. In Sweden, for instance, they had to close an entire grocery store chain for the entire weekend. There's like 800 supermarkets.
Just wild, and it seems like every day, every week, there's a new ransomware attack, a new kind of cyber hack we're talking about. Kevin, thank you. We still don't know if it was the U.S., if it was Russia, or if they just got offline themselves, but I know you'll stay on top of it and let us know when we finally sorted it out. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Senate Democrats moving to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. We got an exclusive look at a draft bill they're releasing today that would remove pot from the Controlled Substances Act. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez is, shall we say, on location.
Allison, this is Curaleaf, a medical marijuana shop. This year, New Yorkers voted to legalize recreational pot sales, but those regulations are still being sorted out. Still, Senate Democrats are hoping to capitalize now on this green rush. For years now, state after state after state has given the green light to the cannabis industry. But now, perhaps the biggest pot push yet.
There is an urgency to this because there are people all over our country seeing their lives destroyed, they're hurt.
Today, Senate Democrats are rolling out a draft of their plan to try to legalize marijuana at the federal level. First obtained exclusively by NBC News, it calls for removing cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, expunging federal records of nonviolent cannabis offenders, and setting up regulations to tax pot products. So, do you have the votes?
Well, we're working on it.
Working on weed are Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, and Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, the chair of the Finance Committee.
We legalized in adult use in 2014. And oh my goodness, the skeptics said that Western civilization was going to pretty much end. What we have seen in terms of the actual facts is we've generated more than 6 times the predicted revenue.
Is this one of the top priorities for Democrats?
It's one of the high priorities. We have a lot of priorities, obviously.
But at the same time, you haven't been able to get infrastructure done yet. Why bring this up now?
We got to move forward on a whole lot of things.
Critics say the marijuana industry has been growing too fast and is marketing high-potency pot to kids.
I think we can expunge records. We can, not prosecute low-level use, not give someone a criminal record, but we don't have to go to the other extreme of, pot gummy bears and 99% THC dabs.
Supporters of federal legalization argue communities of color are still disproportionately incarcerated for a drug already legal in many states. 18 states plus D.C. allow recreational pot use. 37 plus D.C. allow medical marijuana.
The war on drugs has not worked.
Stephanie Shepard spent 9 years in prison for a nonviolent marijuana-related charge. Even now, job and rental applications are brutal. This legislation would change that.
What has a drug conviction done to your life?
Changed it completely. My life will never be the same.
What's also changed dramatically is Americans' views on weed. Back in 1969, only 12% backed marijuana legalization. Now, 68% do.
More and more people across the political spectrum want it. And so it's going to roll. It's going to roll.
But Democrats would need 10 Republican votes to break a filibuster, and some, even within their own party, have not signed on. So, Allison, it may be a while before the smoke clears.
It is time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Today, one of the nation's largest investment advisory firms, TIAA, paying up to the tune of $97 million. NBC News reporting the company pushed thousands of its customers into higher fee accounts, benefiting the firm at their investors' expense. NBC News investigative unit senior financial reporter Gretchen Morgensen wrote that story. She joins me now. Gretchen, great to have you with us. New York Attorney General Letitia James calling this a case of corporate greed. She's saying TIAA relied on its reputation as a trusted and objective financial advisor to profit off of clients through fraudulent and manipulative sales practices. Those are some fighting words right there. So what exactly is the AG and the SEC accusing TIAA of doing?
Well, this is a case that's central to investor protection, Allison. The point is, who is the firm serving first and foremost? It's supposed to be the investor, the client. But in this case, both the SEC and Letitia James said that TIAA was putting its interests first. And that's a no-no. They are supposed to be serving you, their customers, but in this case, they pushed, as you said, tens of thousands of their clients into accounts that were more costly and that actually didn't perform as well. Now, the costs that the investors were paying did go into the firm's pockets, so that's where you have the conflict.
Gretchen, TIAA settling for $97 million. That's a pretty nice deal there. Where is the money going, and what else did they agree to?
Well, the $97 million is supposed to go back into investors' pockets. And so there will be a fund set up for investors who were harmed by the practices to try to get some of that restitution, which is a very important thing. That's going to be hard to do. It's going to be a time-consuming process, but it is important. Now, TIAA, as is very typical in these kinds of cases, neither admitted nor denied the allegations that were made by both the SEC and Letitia James. But it is agreeing to make those payments of $97 million, as well as agreeing to reforming some of its practices. For example, it's going to require that its advisors be very explicit about any conflicts of interest that might be involved with their practices. It's also going to require advisors to be very clear to customers about how the accounts differ at the firm and what the benefits are and the costs. So those are really important reforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Gretchen, TIAA is an enormous company and they have a really storied history. They manage more than $1 trillion in assets and they started with $1 million from Andrew Carnegie over 100 years ago. Could you just give us a little bit more background? What do they do? I know they haven't admitted wrongdoing or denied it, but have they said anything else about all of this and sort of what this means for the future of TIAA?
Well, TIAA is an interesting firm. It's different from a lot of Wall Street firms in that it really focuses on the nonprofit employees. So workers at hospitals, workers at research organizations, academia, universities, colleges. This is who its customers are. It has 5 million customers, very big, and 15,000 institutions that it serves. And it typically serves as, the record keeper for your retirement account. So that is your safe money. It's your money that you want to protect. And so these practices in those kinds of accounts it's really important that the firm puts your interests ahead of its own. And of course, that's not what they were doing, according to the regulators. So this is a firm that is very much in the nonprofit space. And it is trying to, it says it's trying to have teachers, be able to retire with dignity. And so we need to know that they are going to change these practices because the kinds of clients that they have, are not necessarily expert in financial matters. So it is a storied firm. It's a firm that has held itself out as being different from most financial services firms. But unfortunately, these practices are very common on Wall Street. And so that's why it's important that the regulators do police these kinds of things.
Well, it's certainly got a lot of attention. We know that they'll be under the microscope going forward to make sure that they're doing things the right way. Gretchen, thanks for coming on to talk with us about TIAA today.
Anytime, Allison. Thank you.
The time is never right to attempt migration by sea. To those who risk their lives doing so, this risk is not worth taking. Allow me to be clear. If you take to the sea, you will not come to the United States.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas warning Haitians and Cubans do not try to come to the U.S. illegally by sea. Both Caribbean nations dealing with upheaval and unrest. NBC News correspondent Julia Ainsley joining me now. So, Julia, the Coast Guard's patrolling the waters. They are watching for both Haitians and Cubans who are trying to get here by sea. What are they seeing? Are they coming?
Well, they say right now they're not seeing a surge, but this seemed to be kind of a preemptive warning by Mayorkas yesterday, who I have to point out came to the United States with his parents as a child when they themselves were fleeing from Cuba. So that's not lost on us here. But what they're seeing right now is that, there could be potentially be more people who would want to leave those countries, as we know after the assassination of the Haitian president and after Cuba is seeing protests so large, I mean, bigger than anything they've seen in decades. There's a lot of violence, a lot of unrest, a lot of hunger, a lot of that the result of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of those people might be willing to leave now, might be trying to leave. And right now what we're seeing from the U.S. is a stepping up of protecting its coastline, putting more Coast Guard in the waters and saying, do not come here. In fact, even if these people have a legitimate asylum claim, Secretary Mayorkas says they would not be resettled in the United States, but they would go to third-party countries. It's a very strict line he's drawing right now during a time that a lot of advocates say is a major time of crisis when the U.S. should be passing out, open arms and condolences, not shutting its doors.
Julia, you bring up a great point that Secretary Mayorkas' family fled Cuba in the 60s. I mean, so many people might be watching him standing there and thinking, well, I, too, can be part of the government if I try to come to America. What are immigration advocates saying? How do they feel about his warning not to come here?
That's right. I mean, the Mayorkas story is one of many Cuban success stories of people who left under communist rule and came to the United States. We can think of many people who have done that. Right now, they're facing sharp backlash from the immigrant advocacy community. People who really say that the Biden administration is going back on its word of trying to restore an orderly, humane, compassionate immigration system. It's the kind of thing that they say they would have seen under the previous administration. They didn't expect to see now. I do have to point out that this isn't a sharp change in policy. It's really just that the messaging to step up these interdictions is coming at this specific point, and that Mayorkas took it upon himself to hold a press conference just to get this message across. In fact, I saw from one group, the Haitian Bridge Alliance, that they think that this goes back on the Biden administration's word that Black Lives Matter because of their targeting of Haitians. So we're seeing a lot of very strong words and backlash from people who say that this not only goes against the Biden administration's policies, but also against the ideals that Mayorkas himself talked about during his confirmation hearing when he pulled on that childhood experience.
I think we have another soundbite from that press conference. I'd love to play it if we could, and then ask you something on the other side, Julie, if we can.
Migrants who do attempt to enter the United States by sea put their lives at incredible risk. The waters in the Straits of Florida and the Caribbean are dangerous, especially now as we have entered hurricane season. People will die.
Julia, certainly understand the criticism there, but we have seen migrations to the United States are dangerous no matter where you are coming from. Legitimate concern here that people could be trying to come to America during hurricane season, which could absolutely be deadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a big reason why the United States immigration policy has really, for decades now, focused on trying to keep people from making this journey by sea. It's dangerous enough coming by land if you're looking at Central Americans coming up through Mexico into the United States. But by sea, it's been incredibly dangerous. And of course, we can all think about back to Elian Gonzalez, who was found as a little boy curled up in an inner tube after many people that he came with drowned. They're trying to keep more people from dying. But as a result, a lot of these immigration groups think that we need to be at least reaching out to people who have asylum claims and giving them an easier way to come here at this time.
Absolutely. Julia Ainsley, thanks so much again for your reporting. Britney Spears battling it out again today in court. She is asking to choose her own lawyer after her court-appointed attorney requested to resign. 2 weeks ago, a judge denied the singer's request to remove her father from her 13-year conservatorship. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas joining me from outside Los Angeles Superior Court, where the hearing is still going on, and there are plenty of Free Britney fans, as we can see. Guad, this is a complicated case with a lot of players. Who's involved today? What's on the line here?
Allison, just like you mentioned, there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. And as you can see, the Free Britney movement here, these are fans that have come to support Britney. There's music, there's signs, and they've been cheering for the last hour. This hearing was scheduled to begin about 20 minutes ago. The doors are closed, but unlike the last hearing, This time they are not live streaming the hearing. So the reporters are allowed to go inside with pen and paper, but we will have to wait till the end of the hearing to see what happened inside. Now, the key players here, Jody Montgomery, one of her conservators that's been appointed to deal with Britney's health, she's requested that the judge allows Britney to choose her own attorney. She's also requested that the judge appoints a guardian ad litem that would help Britney choose this attorney. Meanwhile, her current attorney that was appointed by the court has asked to step down. Samuel Ingham, who's been representing Britney during these 13 years, so he's asked to step down, while her conservator is asking for the judge to allow her to choose. Also, another moving piece here is Bessemer Trust, the bank dealing with all of her finances. They've requested that they no longer control Britney's finances. So all of these pieces moving today as we wait for the judge to speak.
Guad, rumor on the street is that Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is there today. Why on earth is he in California and involved in this one?
So Matt Gaetz has shown his support for Britney. He supports ending Britney's conservatorship. He came out moments ago, briefly walked by, spoke to the media and left. But he's just showing his support for Britney, just like all of these fans are here. In fact, there's been other celebrities that have gone to social media. Madonna, Christina Aguilera have shown their support for Britney's independence.
All right, Guad Venegas outside the courtroom. We're waiting to see how a judge rules on Britney Spears today. Thank you so much. We'll stay in touch and see what happens. With Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix and a surge of nostalgia from the 2000s, Asian Americans are rewatching some of the shows they grew up with and seeing them in a whole new light. Here's NBC News Asian America reporter Sakshi Venkatraman.
Appa, yip, yip! Asian Americans are rewatching old TV shows and movies that influence how they saw themselves as kids. Just to name a few, the Harry Potter movies, Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Grey's Anatomy. Really? But for Asian Americans, the childhood faves viewed through a 2021 lens can be a reminder of what might not have been clear at the time. Asian faces are nowhere to be seen. And if they're there, the portrayals are often questionable. I also think Austin Powers is very sexy.
Would you rather have your group portrayed inaccurately and poorly in the media, or would you rather not have your group be portrayed at all? There are some people that would say it's okay to have certain harmful portrayals initially, but that is a stepping stone to the correct and more appropriate and more positive portrayals in the long run. Others would say, nope, I'd rather be portrayed positively or not at all.
Yes, Mom, I invited him over to work.
Work?
On our science project.
Reproduction?
Some examples that I found through interviewing people were London Tipton from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. A lot of Asian American young people were really drawn to her.
London Tipton's really great, really great, really great.
I would say that London Tipton is a blatant counter stereotype to the existing stereotypes that we saw of Asian Americans. So you have the model minority stereotype, the professional foreigner stereotype. But the issue here is that with counter stereotypes, the stereotypes cannot be too blatant. What we then see is that people take that portrayal and they accept it as an exception as opposed to a norm.
There also was a lot of discussion about Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is a cult classic, a well-loved show, and it was just added to Netflix, so it's being exposed to a whole new generation of young people. I think a lot of people saw themselves in it and, found representation in it because there wasn't just like one or two Asians in the background. It was like a plethora of Asian characters with various different personality types.
Hear, hear!
It's a cartoon show, but I feel like it provides a pretty deep-seated, good representation of the East API community. But now, when we look deeper into the show in of itself, there are some issues with the show, right? It's not completely free of error. Some of the characters have an accent, but then you have a white person playing the character, trying to sound Asian, trying to be Asian.
No, Zuko, it won't turn out well.
They're not on screen planting their eyes and painting their skin color. But what is the difference between doing that and voicing a character as an Asian person when you're not Asian? I believe strongly that this will be an ongoing discussion simply because you'll have representation, but the portrayals can always be better. You have a few East Asians being portrayed in the media, but now we want to see South Asians, Southeast Asians, LGBTQ plus Asians, people who are half Asian, half Black. We're going in the right direction, but there will always be room for improvements, and I believe the youth are situated in a pretty good state to fight for proper, accurate, and three-dimensional representation.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.